Salutary neglect, which was Britain's policy of non-enforcement of laws in the colonies, ended in 1763 when the British began to enforce navigation acts. Salutary neglect occurred because the British were occupied with their own matters in Europe, so they decided to leave the colonies to govern themselves. The colonists had become accustomed to self-government and freedom after many years of salutary neglect. This created a feeling of independence from Britain and led to conflict when Britain tried to enforce their own rules. Starting in around 1650, the British's primary use of the colonies became for mercantilism. Mercantilism is the idea that wealth is power. In order to export more than they imported, the British used the colonies as a supply of raw materials and a guaranteed market for all of their exports. The colonial economy was stifled because Britain did not want the colonies to be economically self-sufficient. This angered many colonists and created tension.
In 1754, George Washington and a small army were sent to the Ohio area to claim land for the British. However, the French also laid claim to this land, causing the initial conflict leading up to the French and Indian War. In 1756, France, allied with the natives, and Britain, allied with the colonists, officially declared full-on war over Ohio. During the war, the colonists realized that they had more in common with each other than they had previously thought, which bred unity among them. Some also unified with the Albany Plan to decide their action in the war. Britain ended up winning the war, but lost money paying for it, so they imposed taxes on the colonists to earn the money back. The Navigation Acts were previously in place, but were not enforced until 1763. The British used these acts to promote mercantilism because the colonists could only trade with England. They sought to tighten control over trade and economically benefit. The colonists were astonished that the laws were actually enforced, and dissatisfied because their revenue from trading with France and other countries vanished. While trading with Britain only, the colonists could not generate significant revenue.
The Proclamation Line of 1763 was issued on October 7, 1763. There was enormous tension between the natives and the colonists when colonists began to settle west of the Appalachian, where the natives were already living. Although the colonists had gained control of this land after the 7 Years' War, the natives had not given up their right to the land. Although the British made this proclamation to prevent conflict, the colonists thought that this was a restriction of their rights. The Sons of Liberty were a group of revolutionary colonists who created resistance against the British and were founded in August of 1765. They openly protested the acts the British passed against the colonies. They tarred and feathered British officials, which eventually led to the Stamp Act being repealed. They were most well known for their role in the Boston Tea Party when they dressed up as Indians and threw tea into the Boston Harbor.
The British imposed the Stamp Act on the colonies in 1765 to pay off debts from the French and Indian War. The British created a requirement for all legal documents to be marked with a stamp, and so generously provided these stamps to the colonists while collecting a tax. The colonists felt the law was unconstitutional because they had no representation in Parliament, but were being forced to pay taxes. Additionally, violators of the act were tried in vice admiralty courts, where they were guilty until proven innocent. Both of these caused resentment of the royal government.
In 1770, after Great Britain had instituted numerous of taxes that included tea, glass, paper, paint, and lead, which increased tensions between Britain and the colonists, the Boston Massacre happened, which was a street fight that occurred on March 5th, 1770, between a patriot mob throwing snowballs, stones, sticks, and a squad of British soldiers. The British soldiers responded by opening fire and killing 5 colonists while under attack by a mob. This all occurred in Boston, Massachusetts. On June 9, 1772, the Gaspee was a British Navy ship that was in charge of immigration, was chasing the packet ship Hannah, which was smuggling goods to Rhode Island, and ran aground while chasing it. Then, the Sons of Liberty set Gaspee on fire in retaliation. On May 10, 1773, the Tea Act was established. Months later, on December 16th, the Boston Tea Party had occurred. The Boston Tea Party was a protest caused by the establishment of the Tea Act. The Sons of Liberty banded together and attacked ships in Boston Harbor by throwing tea overboard. In 1774, Great Britain's Parliament passed harsh laws that were called the Intolerable Acts. The Intolerable Acts were meant to punish the American colonies for protests such as the Boston Tea Party and the Gaspee incident. The Quartering Act forced colonists to provide British soldiers with any needed accommodations and housing.
closing of the Boston ports until everything that had been destroyed in the Boston Tea Party had been paid off, suspended the right of government, and revoked the Charter of Massachusetts.
The final one was a law that did not allow British soldiers to be tried in the colonies for any crimes that they might commit. This meant that soldiers could do anything they wanted since they would probably not be punished for their crimes.
The First Continental Congress was a meeting between delegates from 12 of the 13 colonies, from September 5th to October 26th, 1774. The meeting was called in response to the Intolerable Acts and unified most of the colonies. It formed a boycott against British goods after a petition to the king to repeal the Intolerable Acts was ignored. The colonies were beginning to unite against the British for a common purpose.